Sam Carchidi celebrating life adventures himself as he wraps up 46 years at the Inquirer. How you doing today, sir?
Good to hear you guys. Good to talk with you.
It is wonderful to get to talk to you. Congratulations on the final piece and the next endeavors. We will get there shortly. I have a question to start. Can you please explain to me the NHL standards for canceling games with COVID? Because I don't understand how the Flyers had Saturday 9 players out and that game went on, but then they got guys back healthy on Tuesday and that game was canceled.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually sent a text to Bill Daly, who is the second man in charge, right below Gary Bettman, the other day, to find out what the heck was going on. And he said there are a lot of factors that you don't know about. I said, well, tell me the factors. What are the factors? Because they had 6 guys on the COVID list, and they played the Penguins, and as you mentioned, they had 3 others hurt, so they had 9 guys missing. But guys hurt, they really don't count because that happens. But you have 6 guys on the COVID list. I don't understand how you can play, and they did play that game, and the Flyers were beaten 6-2, and then they only had 4 on the list, and the game was postponed against Carolina. It made no sense. And he said, well, there's some other circumstances with workers, and he was very vague, and with the visiting team, meaning Carolina, and they really didn't have many guys on the list. So I still am puzzled. To me, it looks like they're throwing darts, and if you remember, the same thing happened last year when they had the outdoor game against the Boston Bruins out in Tahoe, in Lake Tahoe, and there was no way that game should have been played. The Flyers were missing, I think, 7 or 8 guys, and yet the game was on TV. It was a national televised game, so the game went on. Same thing with the Penguins game. The game was televised. It was on Hulu. It was on ESPN Plus. They're trying different ways to make money, the NHL, and it sure looks like that game was played, because of the streaming service, and they felt indebted to the streaming service. So, it makes you shake your head because a lot of unfairness, a lot of inequities in the NHL. I think comes out, looking very small with these rules. Everybody's shaking their head, just like you mentioned.
Well, yeah, and Sam, my problem is it isn't necessarily which games they're going to play and which players they're going to use, but it seems like even when they're at full strength, they have a young, promising goalie who is doing nothing more than at this point ducking and covering, because he's got no defense in front of him. I mean, I went to the Penguins Flyers game, and I know that they were shorthanded. They were missing their top 2 defensemen, but they're not getting that puck out of the zone. And from everything I'm hearing from people around the country, they think Carter Hart's doing a great job, but he's got no protection back there. What are the Flyers doing, and what can they do at this point to make sure that he doesn't fall down a hole during his best years?
Yeah, well, in defense of Chuck Fletcher, the general manager, he did go out and make some moves, and of course, the biggest move was getting Ryan Ellis in the offseason. I think Ellis has played 4 games, so who could account for that, for his injuries, and that's a big part of it, because what it does, it shuffles the entire lineup. The defensive pairings are totally mixed up right now. You have 2 left-handers on the top pairing last night in Sanheim and Provorov, and they're very disjointed right now on defense. Yandel's been a disaster on the third pairing, and as a result, things have not fallen in place. And of course, now Rasmus Ristolainen is out. So, you say, what can you do? Well, they got to get these guys back because they're just not real deep. And some other teams, I'm writing now for Philly Hockey Now, and I wrote this in a column today that other teams have had injuries, other teams have had COVID problems, and guys going on and off the list, but they can withstand that. At least the quality teams can, because they have good depth, and the Flyers don't have that depth.
All right.
And right now they don't have much talent. I mean, let's face it. So, once they get Couture back, once they get Ristolainen back, once they get Ellis back, you're going to see a good product. But by then it'll probably be too late. I mean, it would take a minor miracle for this team to make the playoffs right now. They're 13 points behind, and Boston's got a couple games in hand, and they're just not a real good team. I mean, they played 2 good periods last night against Boston, and that's not enough. I mean, you got to play 3 solid periods, and Mike Yale, to his credit, didn't duck that yesterday. He said that they're just not grasping it. You know, every shift has to feel like, hey, this could be a shift that determines the game, and they're just too lax. We saw that on the first goal last night. Just, you know, poor clearing attempts, and they're just not playing with the intensity that you need to play with, and as a result, they're a mediocre team, if not, you know, less than that right now with all the injuries.
Yeah, look, they were down 2-0 before I could get my little one in bed last night. By the time I walked out of his room, I had the score alert. You know, the score alerts couldn't even update fast enough to give me the first goal and the second goal. That's the problem with the slow starts. One thing, I get guys out of the lineup, but they're taking some awful penalties. What can this team do in that department? Because they've had power play struggles when they're on the offensive side. They've had penalty kill struggles when they give it up. And I just don't know, how do you fix this, or do you move more players at the deadline because you can't?
Yeah, I think it's a matter. I think some of the young guys are committing some really bad penalties. We saw that last night, and it's just a matter of right now, you know, they don't have an NHL caliber lineup. I mean, you know, I give them credit. They played pretty well last night over the last 2 periods, but, you know, some of the penalties made you scratch your head. I agree with you. And you know, you hate to say they have to get the guys back because they just don't have the depth right now. And, you know, if Couture's in there, then everybody else slides down and it makes the lineup that much better. So, you know, until that happens, and right now they're being very vague about when these guys will come back. I mean, Couture did make the trip with them, you know, to Boston, but, you know, I don't even think he's skating right now. So, and the same with Ryan Ellis. They're being very vague. We know Ristolainen will be back soon. He's on the COVID protocol list, but this team just is not real deep. You know, they need the young guys like Morgan Frost to develop. They need the young guys like Cam York to develop, and York has shown some promise. And I think Morgan Frost has not been great, but he's shown some flashes, and I think he's going to be a good player. I don't think a great player, but I think he's going to be a good player. And so, you know, we'll see. It's going to take time, but right now they're a minor league team, and the farm system just is not real good.
Sam, as most of the people in this city know, you've been basically the historian for the Flyers for the last half century. I still get a newspaper, and I loved opening the newspaper and seeing your articles for so long. And I know we're going to talk in a minute about your continuing somewhere else. But one of the things that I'm concerned about with the Flyers, and I was there, was that the history of the Flyers and the things that are important that made this organization special, as far as being a family, which is a way to recruit free agents to come here, seems to have been lost somehow. I mean, I was sitting there in my seat going, when are they going to honor Ed Snyder? And somehow the Flyers went that entire game and that entire day without honoring the patriarch of this family. What happened because people are still wondering what exactly happened that the Flyers somehow missed that?
Yeah, former players even got involved and spoke up about the lack of recognition of Ed.
Yeah, and I think it was just an honest mistake, to be truthful with you, because I know Dave Scott is very close, was very close with Ed Snyder, and I don't think it was anything deliberate, to be honest with you. I think it was just an oversight, and they would probably say, hey, there have been a lot of people who've meant a lot to this organization, a Fred Shero, a Keith Allen, and we don't honor them. They've passed away, and we don't honor them on their birthday. But Snyder is special, and they should have, really. But I think it was just an oversight. I don't think it was anything malicious or anything like that, because they talk in reverence when they talk about him. I mean, Bob Clark, who's still a senior advisor. I mean, he, to him, Mr. Snyder, as he always refers to him, even to this day, was almost like a second dad. So I don't think it was anything deliberate or malicious. I think it was just a mistake, and unfortunately, it just slipped through the cracks.
I think I was surprised by it. I just think it hurts with the perception of the fan base. You look, there's more empty seats at those games. There isn't the excitement in the fan base. And then you mentioned Bob Clark, and look, I've worked in media and communications for years. Whenever I see somebody give quotes on the record, I wonder why and what their intent is. I was kind of surprised that Bob Clark went off on everything Ron Hextall this week, from his management style to his draft picks to his trades. What is going on there?
Yeah, Clarky would have to answer that. I actually texted him, and after the outburst, and he said, he didn't respond. So obviously, he did not want to comment on it any further. But to me, it seems like there was an ulterior motive there. Maybe it was to distract what's going on with this team. Clark is very close with Chuck Fletcher. They worked together with the Florida Panthers, and Clark had a big hand in hiring Chuck Fletcher. And this team looks like it's going to miss the playoffs in back-to-back years for the first time since 93, 94. So maybe he was trying to, direct the attention away from that by saying, hey, the reason we're in bad shape right now is because of the condition that Hexie left this team. Well, the funny thing is that when Fletcher took over, he went out of his way and praised Hextall for leaving him some really good prospects and the Probros, the Konechny, and the Sanheims, guys who have not developed since then, guys who look very promising then. But, to me, Clark's comments, I think it was revisionist history. I think that he painted a picture that Ron Hextall did a horrible job here, and especially with his draft picks. And I went back and I wrote a story and outlined each player, each first-round pick, because he was very critical about the first-round pick. I think I would give him like a C+, which, is not the picture that Clark painted. I mean, he's had some good picks, some real good picks. The Farabee pick was tremendous. And, Provorov, you can argue that he's not a great player, but he's a good player. Sanheim still has promise. He hasn't lived up to it. Konechny was a guy who scored 24 goals 3 times. I think he was a 27th pick overall in the first round. Is that a bad pick? Yeah, I mean, it's revisionist history, and Clark was very good. I went back and looked at his draft picks. He was very good, but he also made some really bad picks, as all general managers do. And, of course, the focus was Nolan Patrick. And for Clark to say that not one of our scouts wanted Nolan Patrick, I cannot believe that, because I've talked to a lot of scouts, and almost every scout around the league had Nico Hischier, who, of course, went number 1 to New Jersey, or Nolan Patrick, who went number 2 to the Flyers. Almost all these scouts had them 1, 2. So if the Flyers scouts disagreed, I'm sure there were a lot of them that did, that wanted Cale McCarr from Colorado, who ended up going to Colorado. I'm sure there were a lot that wanted McCarr, but to say all, I find that hard to believe that all of them said no to Patrick. I just think that's revisionist history.
Sam, even though you when we think of Sam Carchidi, we think Flyers and NHL hockey, you've covered so many of the events that shaped our city, including the Fog Bowl, Tommy Green's no-hitter, Phillies Dodgers Black Friday. So many of those events outside of covering anything with the Flyers. What will you remember most, or what is your fondest memory of the thing that you have covered?
I think one of the most exciting things I covered the Phillies in the 93 World Series with the Macho Row Phillies that went from last to first. That was a fun ride, and of course Joe Carter ended it in Game 6 of the World Series. I was at that game. Sorry to bring it up. I was at that game.
Well, thanks a lot, because Jason just started crying.
Jeff knows that moment is seared in my brain. I've talked about it on the air many a time, Sam.
But sometimes in losing, you remember stuff like Mitch Williams was such a stand-up guy after that home run. I remember that. I remember Bill Giles walking in around the room and trying to console everybody and hugging them and literally putting two hands on their shoulders and shaking them and saying, you should be proud of what you did. I'm proud of you. He went over to each player, and you remember stuff like that. And the Flyers in 2010, their magical ride, which I thought was going to end with the Stanley Cup, because once they beat Boston and came back from 3 down, 3-0 and 3-0 in Game 7 and won that series, I just thought they were a team of destiny. And unfortunately, it didn't happen. And we all know about Game 6 against Chicago and Patrick Kane's goal that got past Michael Leighton. So,
pain, Sam. You're making me feel pain here. These moments in my life.
The Game 7 win, though, in Boston with Simone Gagne scoring after a delayed game penalty on Boston, that was one of the best moments because, like I said, you thought they were a team of destiny, and to come back the way they did and to silence that crowd there in Boston was just amazing. But, I've been blessed to be able to interview, and I wrote this in the story the other day. When you're doing it, you don't really understand that you're interviewing legends. Like I've talked to Hank Aaron, I've talked to Gordie Howe, I've talked to some of the greats, all-time greats, Joe Frazier, and on and on. And
I was surprised you thought Jaromir Jagr was the funniest.
Yeah, he was amazing. He was a great guy, and one of my favorite guys to interview. Danny Briere was Ian LaPerriere. They were two of my favorites. Lenny Dykstra was great. I know he has had problems later, but Lenny, for some reason he would really open up to me, and I got along great with him. Bob Boone was one of my favorites, one of the first guys with the Phillies back in the day when I interviewed him when I was at a weekly paper. And then you remember some interviews that came unexpectedly, like James Taylor, the great singer. He was doing the national anthem before a Flyers Boston game at Fenway Park before the Winter Classic, and they made him available for interviews. And I never thought I would ever ask James Taylor some questions. That the unexpected interviews. I interviewed Babe Ruth's daughter, believe it or not, in 1976. The Phillies hosted the All-Star game at Veterans Stadium, and they had the media facilities were at the old Bellevue Stratford on South Broad Street, and the players were there. It was John Montefusco, Randy Jones, and we throw some names out there, and Mark the Bird Fitterich. They were some of the pictures, but I ended up talking to Babe Ruth's daughter. She was there too, and they were honoring Babe, who of course had passed away years before. And I remember, this is kind of a funny story. I remember talking to her and looking at her, and you could just see in her cheeks, she had the look of her father. And I remember saying to her, I said, "You really have a resemblance to your dad." And I was just making small talk because I was doing a story on her. And then she looked up at me and she said, "That's kind of funny because I was adopted." So it just floored me, and I felt really low then, like, oh. And, so, some of the unexpected interviews that you get are really memorable, I think. And Bobby Thompson, you guys are probably too young to remember the shot heard around the world, 1951, one of the most amazing and talked about games in baseball history. It goes down in football with probably the immaculate reception of Franco Harris catching the deflected pass. In baseball, the Giants came all the way back. They were like 13 games back in August, came all the way back and had a playoff with the Dodgers, beat the Dodgers in a playoff. They're down like 4-2, I believe it was. I could be wrong in that score, but Bobby Thompson hits the 3-run homer to beat them in the last inning. He hit the home run, which was dubbed the shot heard around the world, and he hit it against Ralph Branca. And those two became good friends, and they actually traveled around the country together and did book signings and autograph signings. So I remember covering the induction ceremonies to the Hall of Fame when Rich Ashburn went in, and Mike Schmidt went in, and I was part of the in-car coverage with Jason Stark and Frank Dolson, and I remember they had a room set up, and these two guys were in there. This is years later, of course, but they were still talking about the shot heard around the world, and that was so cool to be able to interview them. It was totally unexpected.
Wow. I enjoyed the piece on your 46-year journey that you had. I encourage everybody to read it. The subhead seems like it was perfect. Every day was different. Every day was an adventure. Every day was filled with surprise. Tell me real fast how people can find you at Philly Hockey Now before we let you go back to covering all the news here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, just go to, go on Google and search for Philly Hockey Now. And I usually write 2 to 3, sometimes 4 stories a day. Today I had a column on the possibility of Rick Tocchet coming here and really talking about Mike Yao and how so far he's been so shorthanded and so difficult to evaluate him, and that they should give him a chance over these last 46 games and see what he can do. And he has not had a healthy team. Let's see what he can do with a healthy team. But if not, Rick Tocchet is kind of lurking in the background. So, but anyway, go to Google and Philly Hockey Now, and we do a good job. We cover 15 different teams in the NHL, and it's the site is doing really well. So, I appreciate you mentioning that. And most of the stories are free. Sometimes there's a paywall on a few stories, but most of the stories are free. And like I said, we do an in-depth job of the Flyers and most of the NHL teams.
Well, we encourage your loyal readers to keep following you and some new ones to join. Sam, always appreciate the time. Take care of yourself and keep us updated on what's going on.
Thank you, guys. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.